Hi everyone. So I know I said I was going to start at 9 this morning, but time has gotten away from me today. So sorry about that. So today's live session is all about MTHFR and methylation. So this is a really hot topic and something that I'm really passionate about educating people, because there is so much misinformation around MTHFR and methylation. Okay, so the MTHFR gene is not a diagnosis of a health condition, okay? You need to really understand that. Everyone has an MTHFR gene, and in fact, 40% of the population have what we call a SNP on that gene, which is a single nucleotide polymorphism. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's being expressed, okay? So we need to think about what that gene actually does, the function of that gene, and the enzyme that it impacts, and what in the environment, right, the external environment and your body's own environment will impact the way that that enzyme is going to function. Okay, so the MTHFR gene provides a code for the MTHFR enzyme. It basically says to this enzyme, you are the MTHFR enzyme, and your role is to donate a methyl group to folate. Okay, so you can have a homozygous C677T genetic mutation on MTHFR, whereby it can cause up to a 70% reduction in the functioning of that enzyme. Okay, now this becomes problematic if it causes an increase in homocysteine. Okay, so if it's increasing homocysteine, that is a blood clotting risk and can cause heart attack, stroke, recurrent miscarriage, and also insulin resistance. Okay, so you really want to look at what your homocysteine levels are, particularly if you're homozygous C677T. Okay, so going back to the MTHFR enzyme, it donates a methyl group to folate. Now, we need to think about where we're getting our folate from. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you've got a genetic mutation on MTHFR or not. If you're not consuming folate and you don't have good gut function, then you are likely to be low in methylfolate. Okay, so folate is really high in green leafy vegetables. Okay, you consume your green leafy vegetables, and that needs to be converted through quite a few other enzymes until it gets down to where it is attached to a methyl group with the MTHFR enzyme. Okay, now the biggest absorption organ for folate is the small bowel. Okay, and there are two digestive enzymes that will help with the absorption of folate. One is from pancreatic juice and bile, and the other one is a brush border enzyme. Okay, so if you have issues with bile excretion, okay, potentially you have an issue with folate absorption. If you have SIBO, SIBO causes a reduction in the synthesis and excretion of these brush border enzymes that you need to absorb folate. Okay, and the particular brush border enzyme that absorbs folate is zinc dependent. So if you have a zinc deficiency, you might also be hindering your absorption of your folate. Okay, now the other thing is we know folic acid, which is fortified in Australian wheat and wheat probably throughout the many countries, and it's also in supplements, blocks the uptake of your natural folate. Okay, so if you're consuming over 200 micrograms of folic acid a day, that will block the uptake of your natural folate. Simply doing that is going to cause a reduction in your methylfolate. Okay, so we can't just be thinking about one gene. We need to think about what are you putting in your body, how's your gut functioning when it comes to what is actually going on with the methylfolate that you have available to use. Okay, so hope that makes sense. Now, one thing I think there's a lot of confusion about is MTHFR and B12. So people will say, oh, I've got MTHFR, I'm low in B12, I have to take B12. Now that enzyme, that gene, the MTHFR gene and enzyme has nothing to do with your B12 levels or your utilization or absorption of B12. Okay, the link is that you cannot use your methylfolate if you don't have enough B12, because B12 carries the methylfolate into what we call the methionine pathway that makes SAMe, which is your methyl donor. Okay, so B12 is its own issue. Okay, so B12, we're really looking at gut function for B12 because you need adequate hydrochloric acid to be able to break down your protein and to activate the pepsinogen. So pepsinogen gets converted into pepsin in the gut with hydrochloric acid, and that really absorbs your protein and your B12 levels. And B12 is also absorbed through the small bowel. Okay, so issues with SIBO can cause B12 malabsorption, and low hydrochloric acid can also cause B12 malabsorption. And simply, if you're not eating enough animal protein, then it's very likely that your B12 will also be low. Okay, so I hope that clears that up. MTHFR has nothing to do with B12, it's its own issue. Okay, so what does methylation actually do? Okay, so methylation is a biochemical process in the body that occurs in every cell, and it occurs probably millions of times a second. Okay, and without methylating, we would not be alive. Okay, so we're all methylating. Okay, now methylation methylation is basically what happens is the methyl groups attach to enzymes, and they help those enzymes turn on and off. Okay, so they need to be turned on. So for instance, the catechol methyltransferase enzyme needs to be turned on because it helps break down dopamine and adrenaline. Okay, but it also needs to be turned off because you don't want to bottom out your dopamine and your adrenaline. Okay, so it's like an on-off switch. So that's really important. It's on-off, on-off. Okay, so if you want to go and Google this, you can actually Google what we call methyltransferase enzymes. Okay, and there are around 200 methyltransferase enzymes in the body. And each of these enzymes, if the acronym for them will end in an MT. Okay, so we've got histamine, N-methyltransferase. Okay, it's a methyltransferase enzyme. It requires a methyl group to work. We've got catechol methyltransferase. That's a methyl group, so that's a methyltransferase enzyme, so it requires a methyl group to work. Phenylalanine methyltransferase, same thing, needs a methyl group to work. Okay, so there's about 200 of these guys. Okay, so one of the major enzymes that methyls work on is actually the production of phosphatidylcholine in the body. Okay, and phosphatidylcholine is a very important part of your cell membranes. Okay, so cell membranes are made with a fat biolayer, and phosphatidylcholine is really important for making this cell membrane. Okay, and without healthy cell membranes, we don't have healthy cells. Okay, and our cells need to be robust and healthy because enzymes, receptors for enzymes will sit on your cell, and the channels that go in and out of the cells to help drive nutrients into the cell and toxins out of the cell, that needs to be really robust, and it needs to sit in a really nice ordered fashion. Okay, the other thing phosphatidylcholine does, it helps make your bile acids, which is also really obviously important for digestion and absorption of your fat soluble vitamins. Okay, another really important methylation is energy production. A lot of your methyl groups will go to making creatine, which is essential for energy. Okay, now when it comes to women's hormones, okay, methyl groups are really important for the detoxification of estrogen via the COMT enzyme. Okay, now COMT also breaks down, so I think I just cut out then, hopefully it's come back. Okay, now the other really important enzyme that methyl works on is the histamine methyltransferase enzyme. Okay, so we're all interested in histamine. So the histamine methyltransferase enzyme is the only enzyme that breaks down histamine in the central nervous system. So the DAO enzyme is pretty much absent in the central nervous system, okay? So when we're dealing with issues with histamine causing headaches and migraines and vertigo, problems regulating your body temperature, anxiety, nausea and motion sickness, and insomnia, okay, it is the job of the histamine methyltransferase enzyme to be breaking down the histamine that is causing those problems, okay? But as I always say, why do you have high histamine in the first place? And it's most likely due to environmental issues. So SIBO, large bowel dysbiosis. It can be due to estrogen detoxification issues and mold. Okay, so if you go in with methyl groups to just break down histamine in the central nervous system, so doing that looks like taking SAMe, it may help you, right? But often it will actually make you worse because you're not actually addressing the root causes to why this histamine is building up in the central nervous system in the first place. Okay, so methyl groups are dynamic. You need them, but you don't need too many of them. Okay, so sometimes people will take a whole lot of methyls or a whole, like methylfolate, methyl B12, they'll take a lot of SAMe and that will push their methylation too much. They will sort of over-methylate. They'll have so many methyl groups that they will start pushing these pathways too much. They'll start pushing their estrogen. They'll start breaking down their histamine. Methyl groups are also important for balancing your neurotransmitters. Okay, so if you push your neurotransmitters too much, you can make too much serotonin, too much dopamine, or you can bottom out your serotonin too much or bottom out your dopamine too much. Okay, so it's a really, really dynamic process that your body will like to do if given the right environment to do that. Okay, so that means ensuring that you don't have gut issues. So fixing your SIBO, making sure you've got good hydrochloric acid, making sure you're absorbing your folate, making sure you're absorbing your B12. Okay, the other really important nutrient for methylation is methionine, which is a sulfur-based amino acid. Okay, so sulfur-based amino acids are really important for the whole methylation pathway and the transsulfuration pathway. Okay, so, really getting good animal protein and eggs is going to really help get your methionine levels up. Okay, so what I think are the best tests to start with when looking at methylation are going to be definitely testing for your active B12 levels. So I often see serum blood B12 levels come back around sort of the average mark at around 350. And then that same person might have an active B12. So active B12 is what's in the cell. They might have an active B12 level of over 128, which is really good, adequate. But the next person might have serum B12 at 300 to 350, but their actual intracellular B12 might only be 60. So you can't really rely on serum B12 levels. You need to look at the active B12, and we need that to be over 128. Okay, so the lab result will say, well, in Australia anyway, higher than 128, and we say tick, that's good. Okay, now the other test that's essential is homocysteine. Okay, so you really can't look at what to do with methylation until you know what your homocysteine levels are, okay? Because homocysteine is moving around the methionine pathway to help create SAMe for methylation. That's one of its essential roles. So homocysteine is involved in the production of SAMe. But homocysteine also has a very, very important role as a storage molecule for sulfur. And so it's also used in the transsulfuration pathway. Okay, so the body's correction mechanism of preventing homocysteine from getting too high, as it is a cardiovascular risk. It causes heart attack, stroke. It can also cause recurrent miscarriage. It can cause insulin resistance, and it also damages the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so that's not good. So one of the body's correction mechanisms to lower homocysteine is to lower it down via the CBS enzyme, down the CBS transsulfuration pathway, and it does that with vitamin B6. Okay, so if your homocysteine levels are high, okay, you need to be thinking, is there really a issue with MTHFR? Does this person eat lots of green leafy vegetables? They don't have SIBO, they don't have folic acid, and they have a mutation on MTHFR, like a homozygous C677T, which can be a big reduction. You think, okay, potentially this person, even though they're consuming all this folate and not blocking the absorption, because of that genetic mutation, they might be requiring a bit of methylfolate. Or is their homocysteine so high because they absolutely have next to no B12? Okay, so their B12 levels are really, really, really low. So we can often see people with no mutation on MTHFR, but they've got very, very low levels of B12, and their homocysteine levels are building up due to such a significant B12 deficiency. Okay, now the other way that homocysteine gets lowered in the body is via the BHMT enzyme, and that is reliant on choline. Okay, so if people, again, aren't consuming enough animal protein, really, then they can have issues with enough choline to reroute homocysteine to methionine, which circles around and around and around. Okay, so homocysteine with methyl B12 and methylfolate will be moved into methionine. Methionine then goes on to create S-adenosyl methionine. So it's like the active form. It is SAMe, the methyl donor. Okay, and once the methyl groups are shared and provided for these methyltransferase enzymes, it gets deactivated and then it will convert back into homocysteine. Okay, and then it should go round and round and round as long as you've got enough methyl B12, methylfolate, choline, and B6, because B6 is going to lower it through the CBS pathway. Those nutrients in place, it's moving around and round and round and doing its job as a methyl donor and doing its job as a sulfur donor for the transsulfuration pathway. Okay, so really looking at your B12 levels, you can't really do sort of methylfolate testing is not really easily available. You've got to question your patient. What are they consuming? Are they consuming folate? Are they blocking it with folic acid? Okay. Now, the other thing that can often happen, and this is a this test is so important to look at, is, well, it is homocysteine and when it's low. Okay, so when it's low, guys, it's just something you need to hone in on, focus on, and understand, because it's really not normal to have low levels of homocysteine. It is mainly, so I'm seeing thousands of patients and looking at this for 7 years now. The major cause of low homocysteine is mold. Okay, so mold, due to the amount of oxalate it causes, okay, will drive your sulfur down in the body. Okay, so because mold contains oxalates dump your sulfur in the urine. Okay, so your oxalates share the same transport carrier as sulfur. Okay, so oxalate hogs the transport train, and sulfur gets excreted in the urine, which is really bad, because sulfur is essential for making glutathione to get on top of this inflammatory mess that mold and oxalates and it causes histamine is. Okay, and it also will cause reduction in the sulfur you need for the sulfation pathway, for your liver detoxification pathway. Okay, so the other thing that starts to happen is if you're chopping up your homocysteine to provide the sulfur required for sulfation pathway and glutathione production, you are churning through your vitamin B6. Okay, so you're going through all your vitamin B6, and without vitamin B6, you can't clear pyrroles from the spleen. Okay, so this is where pyrroles is actually stemming from. Okay, it's an oxalate issue. Okay, so low homocysteine is really a red flag for mold illness, and I'm seeing so many patients now with mold because I'm working with a mold specialist and I've sat in on consults with her, and it is so common, and low homocysteine in a test, along with the signs and symptoms, is a really, really, really big flag for mold illness. Okay. So what if you have mold and homocysteine is high? Well, that's good. You can have mold without oxalate. So sorry, what I should say is mold with an oxalate problem is the big driver of low homocysteine. So you can have mold, but you're not building up the oxalates in your body. I'm not a mold expert. I think potentially you might be able to detoxify your oxalates properly, or the type of mold you have doesn't actually contain oxalates. Okay. So what I see is the biggest problems with blocking methylation is absolutely stress. Okay. So stress is going to do a few things. It's going to churn through your methyl groups because methyl groups break down adrenaline. Okay, so sure, we've got to make methyl groups, but we also need to make sure we're just not using all of them. Okay, so stress is a massive thing. Also, the other issues can be huge estrogen dominance issues. Okay, so if you've got huge problems with detoxification of estrogen because you've got chronic gut issues, chronic constipation, and too much histamine, then that is really churning through your methyl groups to try and break down the estrogen via the catechol methyltransferase enzyme. Okay. The other thing is, guys, and this is, people hate this, they hate it, but I can't, when you are a vegan or vegetarian, you're just not getting the amount of sulfur-based amino acids in your diet that you really need to create homocysteine. Okay, so you need sulfur and you need to be eating animal protein for methylation because you need the sulfur-based amino acids. You also need to be making adequate hydrochloric acid, and if you're not eating animal protein, you're not chewing the animal protein and excreting and releasing your hydrochloric acid. Okay, and then what happens is you are not absorbing your B12. Okay, you're not consuming B12, and even the little bit of B12 you are consuming is you're actually just not getting enough B12 in. Okay, so stress, hydrochloric acid reduction, lack of animal protein, lack of B12, lack of methionine, and SIBO. Okay, so really you can't absorb your folate if you have SIBO. Okay, so you end up having low amounts of methylfolate. Okay, one more thing about low homocysteine I should say. So, sorry, 2 causes of low homocysteine. One is mold and oxalates, and the other is lack of intake of animal protein, because the methylation pathway actually kind of kicks off with methionine. So you consume animal protein and you get your methionine. Then methionine will create SAMe. SAMe will donate the methyl groups. It'll then be deactivated and convert back into homocysteine. Okay, and then homocysteine moves round with the use of methyl B12, methylfolate, and choline to create methionine again. Again, it goes round and round and round. Okay, so if you think about it, if you need methionine to make SAMe, and then SAMe does its job, gets deactivated, and then will convert back to homocysteine, if your methionine is low, then your homocysteine can also be low. Okay, so I do see this also with people that are not consuming enough animal protein to get enough methionine. Okay, so they are both low in methyl groups and low in sulfur, okay, required for the production of glutathione and the production of and the sulfation pathway. Okay, all right guys, well I'm going to wrap up. I hope you got a lot out of that. I know methylation is really complicated, but I just want to I just really can't emphasize enough that MTHFR gene is one part of the picture. It's not the be all and end all of everything, and it is you shouldn't just focus on it as causing your health issues. You need to consider it amongst the diet, lifestyle, gut issues, stress, and you need to really look at what your homocysteine levels are doing first, because you can't start correcting methylation until you get your homocysteine levels checked, okay? And then you work with the environment. You work with mold. If you've got mold, you get the oxalates out of the body, you get your gut fixed, you absorb your nutrients properly, okay? And this is the best way to support methylation, rather than just pushing these methyl groups, which cause people to have anxiety and insomnia and depression. I've seen paranoia, panic attacks. Okay, so they're really, really powerful nutrients, and if taken without addressing the root causes of why you're not absorbing these nutrients and why you have methylation problems, can really make people a lot worse. So thanks for joining, guys.